commander is radioing for help. They call to be reinforced, to be evacuated. He could do nothing but command them to consult. The Battle of Rabbah, 2 Samuel 10:6-19, modernized. Chapter 1, Introduction. Pride sparks war. War rarely begins with tanks firing or drones circling. More often than not, it begins with suspicion, and suspicion, once it takes root, grows into pride. The Ammonite king had lost his father, and David of Israel had sent envoys of comfort, an act of peace across a tense border. But the young king listened to whispers. His advisors said, "David is not your friend. These envoys are spies. They came to measure your defense." So the Ammonites seized David's men, humiliated them, shaved half their beards, cut their uniforms, and sent them away disgraced. That single act was more than an insult. In the culture of the day, it was an act of war, and the Ammonites knew it. They also knew they were outmatched, so they prepared, not with their own strength, but with contracts. They paid silver to foreign mercenaries. Across the desert came convoys of armored brigades from Syria, mechanized infantry, artillery, batteries, and hired drone operators. A coalition army of professionals, polished and deadly. To the world, it looked like overwhelming strength. But loyalty could not be purchased with silver, and faith, when exercised, was a difficult foe to defeat. So begins our story, our peek into the past, using our modern eyes to see ancient things. Listen with your mind's eye and see and hear true history played out right in front of you. Israel's response. Commanders of faith. In Jerusalem, David, the prime minister, did not panic. He called for Joab, his field commander, a man whose reputation was as sharp as his tactics. Alongside him was his brother Abishai, fierce and unflinching. Reconnaissance confirmed it. Mercenary battle groups were entrenched in open desert north of Rabbah, while Ammon's own troops fortified the city walls, a two-front threat. Joab studied the intelligence. The mercenaries had superior numbers and heavier armor. Their artillery outranged Israel's. Their drones flooded the skies. Initial reports showed 20,000 infantry, 1,000 heavy mechanized units, including tanks and APCs, and an additional 12,000 rear guard, artillery, logistics, and support staff. But Joab knew the battlefield was not decided by machinery alone. He decided to split the forces. Joab would lead the 7th Sar Megolan Armored Brigade and strike against the mercenary army in the field. Abishai would contain the Ammonite infantry in the city perimeter and command the 180th Barak Armored Brigade. Joab declared to his men, "If the mercenaries overwhelm me, Abishai will reinforce. If the Ammonites press him, I will break away to support. Be strong, fight for our people and for the cities of our God." And the outcome? We leave that in the Lord's hands. It was not only a battle planned, it was a confession of faith, and faith they would need. Chapter 2. The battle lines form. Dawn broke over the desert. Joab's battle group advanced, lean but disciplined. The 7th Armored Company, light tanks and APC-mounted autocannons. 180th Infantry platoons consisted of rifle squads with RPGs and shoulder-launched missiles. Recon drones, circling high, mapping enemy armor and artillery. Mortar batteries, precision-guided rounds preloaded for coordinates. Field medics, armored ambulances following close behind. Across the valley, the mercenary army was entrenched. Rows of heavy tanks anchored their line. Mechanized infantry crouched behind sandbag walls. Drones hovered like vultures. To any military analyst, Israel should have been outmatched. But battles are not equations, they are human. And in war, morale is worth more than steel. Engagement. First contact. The desert fell silent for a moment. Then thunder. The mercenaries fired first. Long-range artillery screamed overhead, slamming into the sand, throwing up fountains of dust and fire. Tanks unleashed their cannons. Drones relayed targeting data, correcting their aim, firing for effect with deadly precision. Joab's men braced themselves. Vehicles rocked. Infantry hugged the dirt, but the line held. Then Joab gave the order. Mortars, fire for effect. Infantry, forward in staggered waves. Armor, push with me. Elements of the Army Group 180th broke away as Israel's artillery answered. Precision-guided rounds arched across the valley, hammering the mercenary front. Smoke rose from their positions. Infantry squads advanced, leapfrogging from cover to cover, suppressing enemy machine guns with coordinated bursts. Light tanks surged forward, smaller and faster than the mercenaries' heavy armor, firing on the move, flanking their positions. The desert erupted in chaos. Close quarters, breaking the line. The mercenary commanders responded with brute force. Heavy armor rolled forward, autocannons tearing the sand, shaking the battlefield with their thunder. Joab's line threatened to buckle, casualties mounted. But his men were disciplined. They held the line. Joab radioed, "HE squads, you're up. Light 'em up." From concealed positions, Israeli anti-tank teams fired missiles streaking across the sky, smashing into enemy armor. One tank, then another, exploded into fireballs. The rest ground to a halt, smoke pouring from their hulls. Snipers picked off exposed officers. Drones marked enemy artillery for counterfire. Engineers cleared mines, keeping infantry lanes open. The battlefield was brutal and costly, but Israel's line did not break. And then it shifted. Mercenary formations wavered. The tank withdrew. Infantry began to scatter. The collapse. Fear takes hold. At first, it was a trickle, small squads falling back. Then it became a flood. Entire companies abandoned their positions. Drones retreated. The mercenary army, so proud at dawn, began to unravel. Why? Because mercenaries fight for pay, not principle. When the battle costs more than the paycheck, courage drains away. Inside Rabbah, Ammonite generals watched from their walls. They had trusted in an alliance, in contracts, in money and might. And now they saw it falling. Their mercenaries were breaking. Their protection was dissolving, and with it, their own courage. As dusk fell, after this epic battle, General Joab consolidated his forces, encircled the city for siege, leaving his brother Abishai in command. In no little haste traveled back to Jerusalem to report in person to the prime minister. Although the battle was won today, speed and action was needed to totally defeat this enemy. His goal was to call up the complete army, including all reservists. His reasoning: strike while the iron is hot, then you need not heat it again. Prime Minister David, a former general and famed warrior in his own right, saw the wisdom in Joab's request and called up the entire armed forces to be mobilized under his command. They began to stage at Helam. It was dawn, and an emergency cabinet meeting was being held to decide how to handle this dire situation. Politicians pitched ideas of raising another mercenary army or bringing in other regional allies to dissuade the inevitable doom. Certain ministers pitched the idea of surrendering, a thought that even the weakest of warriors scoffed at. But in the middle of all the yelling and jockeying, Shobach, the chief of the general staff, was seething. He had watched his superiorly equipped army being outmaneuvered and outflanked. He saw the mercenary army fold. He marched his defeated men home. It was he that would face the families of the slain. It would be him who would order the remaining soldiers to their unknown future. And yet in the minds of these politicians, they would decide who would live or who would die without ever picking up a rifle. As he sat there, tired and worn, bags under his eyes, dirt on his uniform, dirt in his hair and face, shame was the only emotion, his only redemption. And in that moment, an idea formed in his head, drumming out the words of the politicians. If I allow the Hebrews to encircle the city and start a siege, the result will be the same: capitulation. But if we break out now, before they can fortify their siege, we can break them before they're reinforced. This decision must be made by a general, by a soldier, not a politician, and must be done now, not tomorrow. And at that moment, he made the choice, not just for himself, but for the city, for the nation, and for his men. He said to himself, "It is on my life. I have made this decision." And with that, he stood up, dusted himself off, and barely excused himself as he walked out of the room. Making eye contact with his chief of staff, motioning him over, he said, "New orders. We are redeploying in the morning. Every unit that is still combat effective will be retooled and rearmed. Those that are not combat ready will be merged into other outfits. We will create two army groups, one consisting of armor, the other of infantry. We'll head out at dawn and try to break out before the siege can fully encircle us, and hit them hard before they are reinforced. They say sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But when you are neither, fate has abandoned you." Early that morning, as Shobach and his two army groups streamed out of the city, Prime Minister David and General Joab were arriving with a full complement of the nation's armed forces. Just then, the radio sounded from Abishai. "Brother, is that you? You are a sight for sore eyes. I imagine I would have this dance to myself." Joab replied, "No, my brother, we dance together. Break your encirclement and draw on me. Give us cover to stage up and force. Then we attack together. This began the Battle of Helam. The day for Shobak started with an uneasiness. No sleep for him. He knew the morning would be the most important day of his life. He spent most of the night organizing his movements under the cover of darkness, both from his civilian oversight and his enemies just outside the gates. The morning started with drones flying reconnaissance in steady patterns, closer and closer to the enemy lines. And what he saw made his heart jump for joy. The enemy was leaving its encirclement. Before the enemy began jamming the frequencies and shooting down his drones, he could see the enemy retreating, moving away steadily. Shobak exclaimed, "The gods have favored us." His plan now was galvanized in his mind. He commanded armor to the front in a spear movement. Infantry broken into two elements, one directly behind the armor with APC, supported by drones and artillery. The second element of infantry to the rear as reserve. If we attack now with force, we can break their back, he exclaimed. As Abishai organized his troops for an orderly fallback, reports began to stream in. Enemy has opened the gates and are streaming out artillery firing for effect, and it looks like armor is racing at 20 miles per hour with what seems like infantry behind. Abishai immediately radioed to the forward operation base. His SITREP situation report. Prime Minister David, now in command of the Joint Army Groups, was in front of his monitors, glaring at them with a certainty and an understanding that only he had. David lamented, "Shobak certainly is not aware of the full army's presence, and for that mistake, both his army and his city will pay the cost." David now ordered the retreating army group to continue falling back. He ordered tattered forces into the center and ordered them into oblique order. He told the center, "Limp back to me." He then told the rest of Abishai's force to separate from the center on either flanks. Joab, calmly leaning on a table, pouring himself some coffee, walks over to David and says, "What do you have in mind, Commander?" "You remember our proverb, by consultation, plans will succeed, and by skillful direction, wager war?" "Yes, sir," Joab responded. David then said, "Draw them into the perceived weak center." And before he could finish his thought, Joab interjected enthusiastically, "Scipio Africanus, the Battle of Rabbah." Yes. He keyed the radio and said to Abishai, "Show them your limp," and set the trap. Shobak, in his tactical command center located in the rear of the column with the reserve infantry, was glaring at the drone feeds on the monitor. He could see Abishai's force fanning out on both sides, leaving the center open, and there was a lot of dust and smoke behind Abishai's forces. Shobak, not aware of the full scope of things, figured it was dust from the mechanized units. He commanded the forward armored units to push through the center. Then he would clean up with infantry. His field commanders objected because they would push past artillery and drone support. Shobak dismissed their concerns and ordered them forward. It was 0800 hours when the battle began. Forward elements of the Shobak's armored column slammed into the center of Abishai's retreating force. As the tanks fired rounds after rounds into soft logistic targets and infantry units, the heavy tanks caused devastation. Nearby friendly forces begged to intervene, but were told to hold positions or continue to fall back. And this emboldened Shobach's armored forces to continue to sight, line, and destroy target after target. Shobach, convinced of his success, ordered all forces to commit. Infantry would follow behind armor and clean up. He pushed his command center and reserves into the front line to participate in this rout. He committed all of his units to the theater. This is when Commander David unveiled his trap. He ordered all units to turn towards the enemy and attack with force. The front line would now collapse on Shobach's army from its flanks. David command center began to light up with radio chatter, commanders requesting permission to target and engage armor units with armor, artillery units requesting target packages, drones requesting friendly forces to mark their positions with colored smoke. What followed was a grumbling of the ground as bombs hit their targets. Targets were so plentiful, automatic targeting systems were activated so that duplicate targets would not be marked. The morning and afternoon came and went with bloody battles waging all around. And the same mercy Shobach's force showed to Abishai's retreating forces was the same mercy returned. Every unit that moved was targeted with brutish force. Shobach found himself in the middle of the chaos. From his command center, he could finally see the whole picture. He was not just facing a retreating siege force, but the entire army. And not only did he commit his entire force to this battle, he committed his force to a tactical position that could not be won. From his command center, he could hear commanders radioing for help. They called to be reinforced, to be evacuated. He could do nothing but command them to consolidate, hold the line, and await further commands. Finally, the desperate forces that remained decided to break out and head back to the city. Shobach knew his fate was sealed. He asked his chief of staff to give him a theater sitrep. The officer told him 700 armored units were destroyed, 40,000 infantry and APCs destroyed. It was with those last few words he unclipped his radio and walked out of the command center. As he stepped out, a drone starved for a target picked up his movement and fired a missile at his location. The missile hit his command center, killing him instantly. The day ended not much like its beginning. Where there was hope, now there was much death and sorrow. In the city, the politicians and officials awoke to the news of Shobach's defeat. They understood the gravity of the situation. They had provoked a war, hired an army, and lost everything. A siege was unnecessary and would cause needless death. They immediately dispatched their ambassadors with a simple message: complete surrender and capitulation. As the days and weeks passed, both sides buried their dead, honored their heroes, and wrote the history in a way that suited them best. The armies disbanded, and the politicians took up their toil and dispensed the terms of surrender. And in no time, the scars on the cities of Rabbah and Helam were healed. The roads were repaired, destroyed tanks were removed, and the stains of war washed away. Only those brave men that fought and died will ever know the true story of the Battle of Rabbah and the battle for Helam. Closing. So ended the battle recorded at 2 Samuel chapter 10. In ancient times, it was swords and spears. In our telling, it was drones and tanks. But the truth remains unchanged. Wars may shift in weapons, but the human heart remains the battlefield between pride and humility, fear and faith, selfishness and loyalty. And it is there, in the choices of leaders and soldiers alike, that history is truly decided. In our depiction, we took some creative liberties in depicting characters, dialogues, and strategies. These are not meant to add to the historical records, but simply used to tease out and animate the story. We ask if you like our depictions to please like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this.